Hey there, good morning. This is Shannon Lynch, your local realtor here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Thanks for joining me. Today, my guest is Dan Aug of Appraisals. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Shannon.
Good to see you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So let's start off. And I guess the way we sort of, promoted this is the fact that, that appraisers and realtors, we can be a little, that we're a little bit at odds sometimes as far as, what our goals are in the process. Let's just give them a little bit of background about you. How did you become what drew you to appraising, and how did you become an appraiser?
My background is in journalism and communications.
Mm-hmm.
I have a journalism degree out of a State University of New York school, and working in corporate jobs in Manhattan and elsewhere. I was commuting heavily where I grew up in New York, and I knew that down the road, as my career advanced, that I would want to look at other options as I got older and other opportunities would come about, and real estate is very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And so while I was working for Ericsson, the Swedish telecom company, I took some time on the side on nights and weekends, and back in New York, I took appraisal classes and got my apprenticeship.
Nice.
And when the time was right, I started gathering my hours, collecting my hours. And when I moved to Charlotte 5 years ago, I saw the opportunity to, with everything incredible real estate market here, to get involved, and it's been tremendous.
So, and we're not just appraisers and realtors, but we are also friends. So we have that unique friendship that we talk shop, but we talk shop in a very blunt way with each other. We don't hold back with each other.
We're New Yorkers. Come on.
Yeah, we are.
No.
We're New Yorkers, but we tell it like it is. And what I love is that I can come to you and I can ask you questions, and you're a great sounding board. And so I really wanted us to sit down today and let folks listen in to us as we are, and just kind of, peel back the layers of what we do. I mean, so for realtors, for us, the goal obviously is to get the deal to the closing table, right? We want to see it through to the closing. And for appraisers, and correct me if I'm wrong, but your goal is to protect the bank's value, to protect the bank's asset, in that they're going to be lending the money on. Would that be fair to say?
That's a part of it, absolutely. And one of my little concerns all the time is the word inspection, because appraisers have used the word inspection, and our clients have used the word for us, that we do inspections at properties. And there's a big difference between home inspectors and appraisers, and a lot of people don't know what that distinction is. And the home inspector is working for the potential buyer and making sure that everything is sound and safe, and otherwise pointing out where there might be defects. And for appraisers, we're really doing what I refer to all the time as an observation. It's a snapshot in time of not just the property and condition, but the market area. And it's an analysis of the market area and what's happening in specific market areas, a very dynamic time in Charlotte here. And so we're telling a story, a moment in time. What is the value of this particular property in this market area in the greater Charlotte area?
I love that. I love that expression that you're telling a story. I think that's very, not just poetic, but I think it's a great explanation that you are looking at a snapshot in time, because, a month from now, that appraisal could be, different, and most likely would be.
No question. And while the property itself may not have changed very much at all, the market has. And it's all about that specific moment in time, the effective date of the appraisal. What potential comparables are available to us? I mean, one day later or one day earlier, it could have been very different, because a closing of one or two properties can make a difference. So there's so many different variables that are at play here. And so I'm happy to share this with you today. And talk about some of the ways maybe realtors and appraisers can work even better together to help each other.
Absolutely.
Help each other tell that story.
Yeah. Because I think a lot of times, let's be honest, there can be some cantankerous appraisers.
Sure.
And
Leave me alone.
And I'm sure.
Don't get me started, Shannon.
There's been times that I've, gotten on the phone with the appraiser and I do it trying to provide value and the guy doesn't even want to talk to me. Like he doesn't want to talk to me at all. And so, and I imagine you've run into realtors that probably do things that, maybe there's a reason why appraisers are that way with realtors. So my goal today, I'm hopeful that we can learn a little bit more about what it is that you're looking at as the appraiser and what we as realtors can do to not only help you with your job, but to help ourselves by helping you to hopefully have it hit the value we need it to hit. And so I guess part of that would be, so my first question would be, let's talk about MLS. Let's talk about the listings. Should we start there? Is that a good place?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So when a listing agent puts the information in MLS for their seller, we only have so many characters, right, where we can put in the remarks. And in that space, we need to capture the buyer's attention. And so a lot of times, agents may wind up being a bit flowery in their prose, where this is where we're telling the story, right? We're telling the story of why this would be a wonderful house for you to live in, why you would want to be here, what's desirable about this home. But in that space as well, we should be telling a story to the appraiser, correct?
Yeah, in that space with the limited character count, I understand. And one of the things, I've spoken with you about this and that I admire so much about your work is you use additional channels in MLS to tell that story. The photos and the captions that you use, that you include, you take the opportunity to use that caption space to further detail what is unique about this particular property, and that will help you as a realtor, not just with your potential buyer market, but down the road when the appraiser comes and asks you questions, some of which may seem like, how the heck does he not know that, or he or she not know that? Well, we don't, because sometimes we know the answer before we ask the question, but we're verifying, but other times it just isn't apparent in the MLS listing, and the realtor hasn't done what I would think is a really good comprehensive job of telling that story.
That is a great point, because a lot of times I do feel like, I've used up all the space, and now I start abbreviating everything, and instead of putting an and, I put a plus sign, and I really try and cram in as much information as I possibly can in the public remarks and the agent remarks. But you're right, you have a whole nother field under those pictures where you can put in captions to further tell the story. And whether that's a picture of, the kitchen where you can say new granite countertops, new cabinets, new lighting, new paint, new flooring, it's a way to further expand on what you started off with in the remarks. And I feel like a lot of agents don't take advantage of that. I mean, truthfully, it's time consuming.
No doubt, but this is an investment that you're making as a realtor, and your time and the time you spend up front with your MLS listing and the different facets of it. I'll give you another example of where realtors can round out their story better. Is attachments and documents such as list of updates. Put a list of updates in there with your other attachments, with your MOG and your disclosure, your property disclosure, which we'll probably talk about too. But
absolutely,
appraisers, and this is something realtors don't necessarily know. And we were just speaking before we got on air here about, appraisers have to work within forms that are restrictive. So we are limited as well in our character count in some fields and how we describe things. So when it comes to updates, we can go back as far as 15 years on every property we do a report
That's
on.
so crazy.
And describe the updates that have been done in the most recent 15 years. And it's done in 5-year increments. And this is, again, according to the form. So we have to stay within the form or it breaks, and we have to figure out a way to redo it. So as a realtor, you should be always thinking about how can I either in the MLS listing or an attachment, or when I have a conversation with the appraiser, if you're so fortunate, for us to give you our time.
I'm honored.
What were the updates? Specifically, what year were they done, and what was the impact on the quality of the condition of the property?
Yeah. And one of the things that we spoke about, again, like you said, part of being on air is that responsibility falls to the homeowners as well. So I would absolutely advise homeowners to keep a folder, whether that be on the computer online and scanning receipts, or whether that be old school and you have a paper folder for your house, that each time you do any work to your home, you should take those receipts and put them in that folder so you have them easily at hand when you need them. And when the time comes to sell, that you can then go back and say, oh, this is the year that I replaced the HVAC, or this is the year that I replaced the water heater, or this is the year that we did the roof. Oh, and by the way, it was architectural shingles and it was a 30-year roof, because these are all things that get asked on the paperwork. So it's a really great way to keep track of what is your biggest investment. I also list homes for investors, and a lot of times what I do with the investors, and I probably need to do this more with the homeowners as well now that I'm thinking about it, is that I will sit down with the investors and usually in the house, in the space, and I will say, because usually I'll say, hey, I need you to write down a list of all the updates. And like everybody else, investors, we're scattered, we're all over the place, we're running a million jobs, we've got different things going down. When I can actually sit down with them in the space and I have the paperwork and we go room by room, it jogs people's memories. They don't always necessarily recall everything just off the top of their head, what they've done. I mean, I have a house that I've owned 15 years, and like we were talking about before, I replaced the windows, I put in new doors, I put in exterior electrical. It's a 1920s house. It didn't have any outdoor electrical outlets. I put in exterior outlets. It's just all these little things that you do over the course of the time that you own the home. I think it's very easy to forget those things that you've done. So it's a really good idea to keep a running list, whether you're the homeowner
Yes.
or the investor, either way.
Sounds good to me.
Sorry,
Let's do it.
Having a moment. So, okay, where should we go from here? There was so many things you were talking about. I really need to keep a pad and paper that I can jot down notes, because there were so many things you said that I was like, I wanted to talk more about.
I have some thoughts. I mean, so we're at odds, right? Realtors and appraisers can be at odds at times, although we want to work together. We don't want to be frustrated. We want to move quickly and keep pace with this market and this great opportunity that we have working in it. So some of the things that sort of hang us up as appraisers and have us saying, oh, that realtor.
Ooh.
Yeah, and I don't just stop there, but I'll stop now. And I understand why realtors can be unaware of why appraisers make certain choices they do, and we can continue with the MLS listing.
Mm-hmm.
Why that's so important to us as appraisers, that realtors do a great job on that and really pay attention to things like the distinctions between townhouses and condos. Yeah. I mean, ownership type, for some reason MLS, I don't really know the answer to this, maybe you do, but puts condos and townhouses together.
I don't understand it.
For property type, I believe is the
Yes,
the
I
description.
agree. Mm-hmm. And they're not. They are not the same animal.
We have to use, as appraisers, a different form completely for condos versus townhouses. It's very different. There's a lot of different information we have to provide about the amenities, about the condominium management agent, mm-hmm. and the budget, and different factors that affect condo ownership. Townhouses we address basically as single-family residential properties.
Well, and I
it's
think
the
a lot
same
of
form.
people tend to use the two terms interchangeably, and they're
Oh,
not. I
such
mean,
a disservice.
your condo, you as the homeowner only own inside the walls, basically the airspace, right, inside the walls. You don't own the land. But with the townhomes, you own a small piece of land.
How many times I'm doing a condo and trying to find comps and see that or I should say doing a townhouse and see that the site section, the physical size of the site from the MLS listing is left blank. It's being addressed by the realtor as if it's a condo that doesn't have the land piece.
Oh, that's
to it.
interesting.
And so
Okay.
I'm limited in the number of comps I can find MLS by how thoroughly a realtor addresses this specific point of please put the land piece in on your MLS listing for every townhouse you do. And make sure if you do the property type says condo townhouse, please make sure to fill out the ownership type as townhouse.
That's interesting.
That's a separate line item. That will help the appraiser narrow it down and be able to identify all the full list of townhouses that are available for us to use as comps.
But I do agree with you. I think it's convoluted on our MLS. I think that's something that probably should be addressed.
Well, this is great. So, Shannon, we did a program. It would be 3 years ago in April, I believe, and I have been keeping a list of things that I'm going to say the next program I do with you of stuff about realtors. So here's where where the boxing gloves come out.
Well,
come on.
I didn't know we were going all there. Okay,
Yeah.
bring it. I will represent from my team. What do you got?
Note to realtors, like I said, please make townhouse land and condominium no land distinctions.
Okay, that's duly noted.
Note to realtors, don't fudge basement square footage. Please don't include it in your heated living area space.
Okay, let's talk about that because basement that's a bone of contention. Let's be honest. I mean, and I think it is for realtors as well as appraisers. The value for below grade is less than above grade.
Yeah.
When you say fudge, and let's be careful here because some people, it may truly be an honest mistake. What are you seeing and what would you like to see?
Well, particularly with tri-level, split-level, and tri-story designs.
This is a good topic. I like this. Go ahead. Let's talk.
As an appraiser, if any part of that lower area is below grade, we have to include the entire area as below grade.
So if the front of the house, the back of the house, there's a door and it's a walkout basement, but in the front, the soil is all the way up against the house, and all you're seeing is the window that's at the upper top part of the room. That level is considered below grade. Is that correct?
Well, if it's below grade, the entire level has to be included as
below grade.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, I recently called you on one because I had a split foyer. And the way that it was listed previously, because I did check old listings on this address, is they just listed it as upper and lower. But after speaking with you and speaking with my broker in charge, both of you said to me, listen, it has to be main and basement because part of it was below grade. And so that's what I put. So I would say that if you're not sure and you have any questions, check with your broker in charge. And if you have a friend who's an appraiser, check with them too. I saw that look.
So yeah, friend, yeah, we are. But so my concern as an appraiser, and I understand this, if I were a realtor and I were composing a listing for a property that was a split level, and I'm going in and I'm looking at other realtors' MLS listings and seeing that they have included the basement as above grade.
Yeah, it's tough.
And I'm like, all right, so I'm going to get gypped here. I'm going to be sold short on this property because I'm going to report it accurately as below grade. Right?
Yeah.
So I understand, but there's got to be an equaling out here. There's got to be a moment in time where everybody just realizes and looks at this the same way, because as an appraiser, I'm going in and trying to comp out a property with basements, and there's this disparity from realtor to realtor, how they're reporting basement space. And I'm having to manually go in one by one in every single listing of MLS to see, is it truly above grade or below grade? And it's very frustrating as an appraiser. I get frustrated at realtors about that.
So they're going to get caught. That's the bottom line, right? I mean, just because if you put something in there in the MLS and you report it as above grade and it's not, you're looking at the pictures and then you're going out on site. It's very clearly below grade. You have to appraise it that way, correct? I mean, and wouldn't that be the case with these other properties?
What happens is we wind up losing potential comps when we go the next step, and we've spent a lot of time already identifying potential comparables until we go out into the market area and see what's really there. So this is a source of frustration for appraisers.
Okay, fair enough. What else you got?
So in those communities where you have a homeowner association and you've got some amenities, I wish realtors would be more specific about what those amenities are in every case, because you're selling yourself short if you don't take the time as a realtor to specifically list an MLS what comes with the monthly payment or the annual payment for homeowners association dues.
Where would you suggest that be? Because, I mean, you know, we can look up and add in the attachments the CCRs.
Yeah, I mean, there is a field on MLS for amenities. So, and
that's
many
true.
times I've seen it blank where it is in a homeowners association. They've got an outdoor pool and they've got a clubhouse and they've got a
Tennis
dog park
courts.
and tennis court and
Yeah,
recreation area.
absolutely.
And these are things that I, as an appraiser, am taking photos of and including in my report when I have a subject property that's in a nice community with these kinds of amenities.
So let's say we're
'Cause they
talking
add value.
Yeah, so let's say we're talking about a subdivision, you know, which we do have more on the outskirts of town versus in town where there are more neighborhoods, where you do have HOA dues and you do have amenities. Is it valuable to you as the appraiser for agents to make sure that in the photographs that they include pictures of those amenities? The neighborhood pool, the tennis courts, that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah. And why, now maybe you can tell me why, other than being pressed for time and thinking they've done a good enough job as a realtor, why would a realtor not include that stuff?
I honestly don't know. Because for me, the pictures are part of telling the story. So if I want to entice a buyer to my seller's listing, if it's in a neighborhood in town, I'm taking pictures of the shopping centers nearby. I'm bringing my photographer to, like, let's just use NODA as an example. So NODA has music venues. It has restaurants. There's an entire outdoor nightlife going on in NODA. So if I'm listing a property in NODA, I'm also going to ask my photographer to go with me to, 36th and North Davidson, 35th and North Davidson, and let's get some pictures of the storefronts and the music venues and the coffee shops, because to me, that's part of the experience of living in NODA. If I have a house in a subdivision in Ballantyne, same thing. I'm going to ask him to go with me over to the community pool and the tennis courts. It's telling the picture. I want to entice the buyers. I want the buyers to say, oh, this looks like a great place to live. So I've always done it from the standpoint of, for the buyer's benefit, but I never really thought about it from the appraiser's benefit, from the appraiser's standpoint. So that's a great tip.
Thanks. So we're rumbling here. We're battling as friends, realtor and appraiser, to try to work better together. Even
just remember,
going
my
forward.
turn comes after this.
Yeah, I know. And my list is full blown here. But you want to go? You go.
So let's talk about things that realtors think will bring value or should bring value that appraisers don't give value for.
Okay. All right, good. I already have the answer. So
So you feel good about that. So
Go ahead.
I understand, so if we were living in Florida, a pool is kind of a standard, right? Like, so it would be almost a detriment to not have a pool. Whereas here, not as many people have pools. Is that, if you get something like a pool in a backyard, is that considered a positive or a negative? Solar panels, and we can have a whole conversation just on solar panels. You know, people spend $20,000 putting solar panels on their roof, and they're sold on, this is going to give you so much more value on your home. And, you know, so what things like that, and whatever direction you want to go in with that, how, you know, why do appraisers not, why is it realtors think these things have value and appraisers don't?
Good, and I'm glad you framed it that way too, because it may not be apparent to realtors, and I would understand why. It may not be apparent that appraisers have taken these things into consideration when myself, speaking for myself, I have. Mm-hmm. But you may not see a specific line item on the sales grid, the sales comparison grid, for example, that says solar panels or says pool. By the way, hopefully we're just in-ground pools have value, can have tremendous value. Above grade pools are not.
Right.
So just to make that clear for people. And by the way, this answer that I'm giving you based on the question opens a door to another aspect that I wanted to touch on today, which is about bracketing. As an appraiser, when we're comping out a subject property, we have to bracket some of the key aspects of that property. We must do this to tell the story properly in a way that the underwriter sees there's balance to the report and it's comprehensive. So back to different features that you may not think as a realtor that the appraiser has given any value to. Mm-hmm. It's the appraisal report and the form and the sales comparison grid is a bunch of moving parts. It's all these different things. And the entire time that I'm doing the data gathering and the analysis, I'm thinking about what in the end, how do I envision this property in terms of where it fits into this community, into this market area at this time? So I'm looking at all of these things together as well as individually so that in the end, based on what the adjusted numbers are and other factors, including the dynamic nature and how quickly prices are evolving here, especially in certain communities, that I do a thorough job and that I do an accurate job in coming up with an opinion of value for the subject property. So even though I will always include a line item for in-ground pools, by the way. Solar panels as well. They don't come up too often here in Charlotte, but there's a lot of back and forth about solar panels. Like, you know, we could have a whole separate conversation about that. But as an appraiser, you should be taking these items, these features into account, like you've mentioned, and the quality of flooring and the quality of countertops and kitchen appliances and things like that are all part of, potentially we can make condition adjustments based on photographs that realtors provide to us in their MLS listings, how good and thoroughly the realtor has presented an image of this property that we're using as a comparable. We can make thousands of dollars worth of condition adjustments based on that, and I do. And I refer to how I've made those adjustments on the basis of these MLS listings and the photographs and documentation that's included. So help you tell your story both to the buyer market and to the underwriters who may be sitting who knows where in this country, not in Charlotte.
That's valuable information. That's really valuable information. Because like I said, I don't think a lot of realtors understand the importance of, and don't get me started on realtors that will use their iPhones versus hiring a professional photographer to take pictures. I mean, that drives me insane. The first thing that brings your buyers to the table, I mean, how does everybody look up stuff now? It's always on the computer. And the first thing people do is they look at the pictures. And then they read the description. But the first thing they do is they look at those pictures. Those pictures are so important. Okay, that's good. That's good information. Solar panels, let's touch upon that really quickly. So I had someone that was interested in selling their home. They had solar panels. What came about on that, which was interesting, is they said, well, I spent $20,000 on the solar panels, so that should give me $20,000 worth of value. Not the case, correct?
Well, and we could say that's probably not the case with just about any money that a property owner puts into their property.
What's your return on investment?
Yeah.
What's your ROI?
So as an appraiser, dollar for dollar isn't going to happen, most likely. But yeah.
I mean, and the thing for this person was they still owed money on the solar panels, so that has to be reconciled prior to closing. And what was interesting to me is when I came to you and I said, hey, Dan, how do I provide a value for this? And one of the things you said to me was you need to pull up the bills, that you would look at the utility bills for the previous year before they put the panels in. And then you would want to look at them for the current year to see what actual effect they had. Is that right?
At least a full year of documented savings, and hopefully more than that, which isn't always available because it's relatively new, still an emerging energy source, the solar panels here, especially in Charlotte. So yeah, I can't just say that it's presumed savings. You know, it's got to be documented. I have to be able to back it up, because if I have a report coming back to me as an appraiser, I'm looking to be active, and anytime a report comes back to me that I have to explain further is taking me back in time and not helping me move forward with my business. So I'm trying to answer all of these questions up front. And with solar panels, it's a very difficult story to tell because I would say it's an incomplete at this point.
Okay, fair enough. Let's talk about the bracketing, because that's interesting. We talked a little bit about that prior to starting today. And you had mentioned some things that I was really surprised about because, realtors, will go ahead and they'll do a comparative market analysis, a CMA. And generally speaking, we're trying to determine what we think the value is. I mean, obviously, the marketplace determines the value. That's the bottom line. I mean, you can tell me you want $1 million for your house. I can list your house for $1 million. If the marketplace says your house is worth 500, guess what? Your house is worth 500. I mean, you can ask whatever you want. It doesn't matter. It's what the marketplace is willing to bear. I mean, to me, that's kind of the bottom line when it comes to the value. And maybe you disagree as an appraiser because you assign value, right, based on history, which would be the sold comps. For me, and I know you look at some of the actives and under contracts as well. So when I do a comparative market analysis, I'm looking at the sold comps because that's the history, right? That's the past. That's proven that that's what the market will bear. I'm looking at the under contracts because that's the next ones that are going to close. And that kind of paints the picture for me and tells the story of what direction is the market going? Is it still sort of going up? Is it sort of softening and coming down a little bit? What's going on there? And so none of us have a crystal ball, but we do the best we can to kind of read what the market signs are, right? And then I look at the actives because I need to have my sellers look at where are they going to place themselves strategically in the market. So, if there's a house that's similar, let's say it's $350,000, you can either choose to price yourself around the same, you can choose to price yourself a little bit higher or a little bit lower. If you price yourself a little bit higher, but really the two houses are very similar, what's the buyer going to go for? They're going to go for this one because there's greater value, right? If you price yourself a little bit lower, you're probably going to sell quicker because you're perceived to be the better value. So for me, it's a three-part when I do a comparative market analysis and I sit down and I speak with my seller about where they want to price themselves in the market. And I never tell anybody, this is your number. I try to provide the knowledge and the information, and then we have conversations about it. And then the seller will determine, where they want to kind of start in the market, and then we see how the market reacts. But when I do a CMA, I'm pulling up homes that hopefully are close by, homes that are similar in size, square footage, year built, number of beds, number of baths, that sort of thing. If I get a lot of comparables that come up, I may then go ahead and say, does it have a garage? Doesn't it have a garage? That sort of thing. And so I'm always trying to find the ones most like my subject property to compare it to. But you're telling me that you actually, because of this bracketing, appraisers have a slightly different take or way of determining the value. Is that correct?
Well, it's sort of the approach that we're required to take, that underwriters are going to insist upon based on experience, is that we show the subject property in comparison to other properties on the basis of key features, including the size of the site, the heated living area, and the age as three primary indicators. And we are required to bracket each of those categories. So when a realtor, and I understand this could be a source of frustration for realtors, for example, are looking at an appraisal report and saying, how the heck can you pick that as a comp? Look at this one. It's, right around the corner,
Yes.
and it shares these attributes
Absolutely.
with the subject.
Yes.
But maybe here's why. We may have already included one or two other comparables that fit those same criteria, but now we need to, for the underwriter, show a comparable property that has a larger site, as well as a comp that has a smaller site.
Mm-hmm.
Numerically, these numbers have to fit, this bracketing approach. Same thing with the age of the dwelling. It has to be, we have to include a comp that is older and a comp that is newer. Same thing with the heated living area. We have to include one that's larger and one that's smaller. And so for us not to have to do every single report with 8 or 10 comparables,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to do it and do it thoroughly with only 4 to 6 comparables in that range, or we're going to do more. I've done, just last week I did one with 8 comps on a refi in Midwood. But this is why you may say that's not the best comp. Well, it's one of the comps that help us tell that comprehensive story.
Mm-hmm. No, that's interesting because generally speaking, smaller square footage tends to get a higher price per square, right? And then you get, you never, like they'll say you never want to be the biggest fish in the pond because you're going to get the lowest price per square on that house. So that's interesting to me that you're looking at homes that are slightly larger and slightly smaller. Are you trying to stay within 500 square feet, 300 square feet? What number?
Yeah, and great question, because the foundation of all the research I do is based upon the criteria I set forth, that I say to the underwriter and anybody who's reading my report, here are the criteria. We're looking for sales within the past 1 year, within 1 mile radius, that are a range of heated living area. That's a couple of hundred less than the subject and a couple of hundred more. And then through that range, we're going to narrow our search for comparables, true comparable properties, to properties that fit those criteria. Now, we have to often say, well, you know what, that 1 mile radius, we want to stay in a year. We're not going to play with that too much. Very rarely will I go back beyond a year and say a year and a half ago that we have a comparable, because there's a lot of available.
There's a lot of comps, yeah.
But we can look at these other factors and start to really narrow down the list of potential comparables by focusing on those. And sometimes we have to go 2 miles radius from the subject, and we can do so if we explain that to ensure bracketing. We've had to go to 2 miles as opposed to 1, or even 3 or 5 miles sometimes when I'm working in Mint-Hill and areas
so
like that.
crazy.
I'll go 3 mile radius or 5 sometimes for
Yeah,
sure.
I find that really surprising. So what I absolutely want to touch upon before we wrap up, because I know we're almost out of time, this market is so hot. I mean, crazy hot. We're under a month's inventory. We're seeing, on our side of the table, we're seeing buyers coming to the table with really high due diligence, really high earnest money. People are in the super hot competitive markets where stuff is gone in a day and people are getting 15 offers on a house. We're seeing buyers waiving repairs. We're seeing buyers waiving the appraisal that are willing to come out of pocket. And when I say come out of pocket,
don't waive the appraisal.
Listen, to get the house, that's what's happening these days. And, you know, people are coming out of pocket 10, 20, 30, 40,000 above. I mean, I had one last year that, you know, we listed it and the buyer came to the table, I believe it was 45,000 above our ask. And I specifically had a conversation with the buyer's agent and I said, you know, I know we're in a multiple offer situation. Let's be clear, is your buyer, you know, if this doesn't appraise, because I highly doubt it's going to appraise at 45,000 above where we put the list price, because I did my CMA, I did my homework, I knew what the value was. Is your buyer going to be able to come out of pocket the difference when it doesn't appraise? And they said, oh yeah, no, we have money, they have money set aside. And I said, because I'm going to tell you right now, in this market, as hot as it is, that the seller's not going to come down on the price. Now you need to understand, if you're a buyer and you're coming to the table with a really high due diligence, right? Let's say you're locking it up with, you know, $5,000 due diligence, you know, not unheard of these days, in that, you know, $500,000 price point, or even lower. That for the seller really holds all the cards at that point, right? So, I mean, think about this. You're giving them, you know, thousands of dollars due diligence up front. And so if you decide you don't like what the appraisal comes in at, you don't really have a lot of negotiating at that point. You don't have a lot of teeth at that point, because you've already put so much skin in the game that it's nothing for a seller to say, okay, walk. You know, I've got the $5,000. That just covered my mortgage for this month and next month, you know, or whatever. And this market is so hot that it's not a problem for me to put it back on the market, or may even potentially have a backup offer in their pocket. I say all this to say that as an appraiser, when you now see that sold comp come up, that was listed at this number and sold for $30,000 higher, how does that factor in for you when, let's say, there's another house down the street or in the neighborhood that is similar to this sold? And how do you weigh that property value when you do your appraisal?
You know, I am an appraiser, so it depends.
I hate that answer.
I think appraisers have a unique opportunity here in Charlotte at this time, as long as we can do the right data analysis of specific market areas and what's happening in those, to use properties as comparables that traditionally we may not have, because of all of the activity and because of the dynamics. And if we do a good job on our market conditions addendum, which is a year-long look at pricing levels, listing price levels, and closed price levels, and days on the market, and variables like that, to show where things are trending, and can do it in a way that's legitimate and can be backed up by the data, then we can work with these things. Realtors just have to have confidence in their appraisers.
I guess the thing is like we talked about, you said, you know, if you get a really low appraisal, like back in the days of a foreclosure, that might get thrown out. And so something like this, that's also an anomaly in the other direction, would that also potentially get thrown out? Although I guess if you're seeing that across the board, then that sort of becomes the norm, right?
I mean, rule of thumb, when you've identified your prospective comparables, you take the high and the low and you take them out of play. But I mean, I mentioned a refi in Midwood I did last week, and the high sale in that area I kept in and I used as a primary comp, and my subject property was right behind it in terms of value.
So before we go, is there anything else you really want to make sure
Yes.
I know.
Yes.
The minutes went really
Note
quickly.
to realtors. Please don't freely distribute appraisal reports out to third parties. We as appraisers are restricted in how we can communicate with people and to what extent we can share the information we have on our appraisal reports. We share it to only our clients, essentially, and they're allowed to distribute it a little more widely, but it should all be spelled out. For me, it's a matter of, my appraisal reports are my intellectual property. How I write, and my degree in journalism and my background, look, tooting my own horn to an extent here, but that's my intellectual property. To give it to other appraisers to take and steal. Plagiarism is not a cool thing, but we sort of all do it a little bit in appraising.
Wow, I'm surprised that that's even a thing.
I would prefer that you please don't just freely go and distribute. If you want to share my report with somebody for some reason, please get a hold of me and just at least give me the courtesy of that.
So I mean, really, the only people that own that appraisal is the bank, right? I
Yes.
mean, so I'm surprised that that's even a thing, quite frankly. But okay, I know we're almost out of time. So go ahead. Anything else you want to? I see there's a list.
The list has been covered pretty well. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, thanks for coming. This really was interesting and informative. I learned everything every time we sit down. I learned something new. So, and
Likewise.
I really do feel like we could sit here for another 45 minutes and that we've barely scratched the surface. I mean, you definitely touched upon some things that were new to me and I wasn't aware of. And I think a lot of times realtors, we get in our own bubbles, and appraisers, you guys get in your own bubbles. And so I like when you and I take the time to sit down together like this, because what I'm seeing in the market and our experience is, I'm sure, different than what you're seeing from behind the desk. And so, I think it gives us both a greater understanding of where each party is kind of coming from. So yeah.
So imagine the stories we'll be telling 3 years from now when we sit down and do this again.
I'm sure we'll sit down sooner than 3 years. I know it's been 3 since the last, but we won't wait that long till next time. So anyhow, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Shauna.
So thanks, guys. I hope you found this informative, whether you're a realtor or a seller, things that you can do and take away your takeaways from today. If there's any comments you have or any questions, please feel free to add them below. Dan and I will both be checking in on this podcast after the fact, and we'll answer your questions best we can. Hope you found it informative, and thanks for joining me. Take care.